To our lunch panel. My name is Yahya Al-Azraq. I'm based here in Greensboro. We have four awesome people here that are involved in the struggle and the movement who are going to share with us a little bit about their experience being politicized, doing social justice work, and we're going to ask them where they would like to see what they would like to see the revolution that we raise the next generation in. We have a little bit less than an hour. We are running a little bit behind schedule today, but the agenda for this conversation is starting off with some prepared questions that we have for our panelists, offering them an opportunity to ask questions of each other, and then if we have time, we'll have a question and answer session with y'all. First of all, thank y'all for being here, and thank y'all for being here. I'll do a little introduction of everyone, and then they can speak more to their story for themselves. Desmara Gatewood is a Durham native and community activist. Her early exposure to activism through her family's work with the Durham community cultivated an affinity for the social justice movement. While an undergrad at North Carolina Central University, Desmara engaged in various initiatives, including the founding of Kinky and Proud, an organization for women of color with an emphasis on rejecting European standards of beauty and vanity. Since NCCU, Desmara has taught elementary school in Durham County, community organized in Vance County, and remained an active voice for millennial women of color. Currently, Desmara works as a child care organizer with the Fight for 15 campaign and raises her 3-year-old Everett Rose alongside her loving partner, Atreus. She is completing a Master's of Science in Organization Development at American University. Casey is a black middle-class Diplo brat whose people are black Southerners who moved to New York after the Great Migration and Afro-Caribbean movers and shakers from Tortola, St. Thomas, and the Dominican Republic. She fell in love with Greensboro after undergrad and decided to stick around. She's interested in public health and its potential to enable us all to live the lives we deserve to live, through dismantling the oppressions that kill some of us faster than others and make the time we do have here more miserable than it needs to be. Casey is part of the Renaissance Community Cooperative, which will open a grocery store in Northeast Greensboro, one of 17 food deserts in the city, and has been ranked the hungriest in the nation. She firmly believes that cooperative businesses are key in making an economy that allows us all to get enough of what we need, and key in allowing us to shape the economy and the ways in which it impacts our lives. Kaori Crystal Tsuyoshi is a radical Japanese American born and raised in the Triangle region of North Carolina. Her perspective is shaped by the hyphens in her identity and speaks from her bicultural background as a second-generation AAPI woman from the South. At the center of her radicalized lens is the legacy of the reproductive justice framework through which she conceptualizes the intersections of various oppressions. At this time of year, you're going to frequently find her stooped over patches of grass looking for 4-leaf clovers. And last but not least, Holden is a native North Carolinian embodying the complexities of being a black, queer, transmasculine Southerner of African and indigenous Cherokee descent and the child of a preacher. The framing that they bring to the movement and community speaks to those intersections and centralizes collective, feminist, queer, and POC ways of being. The extent of their communal solidarity and advocacy work has been exemplified on both a grassroots and national organizational level. This work has included a focus on civic engagement, cultivating collectives, transgender equity, resource and leadership development for queer youth, economic justice, POC solidarity, and queer liberation theology. We have some really wonderful folks that are doing a wide variety of work. And the first question that we have prepared, and if things are easiest just going from right to left, we can do it that way. But if you want to pass the thing, we can also do that. Are you all right going first?
For all of the questions, or just this one?
Just the first one.
Okay, right.
Okay. So the first question is, how are you politicized or radicalized? Are there particular stories or memories that come to mind of when I think a lot of us experience the systems, but then there's a certain point where we start to develop the language. Yeah.
Well, first I want to say good afternoon to everyone. I bring you greetings from Durham, North Carolina, where we had an extremely effective demonstration yesterday in response to the Freddie Gray tragedy that took place in Baltimore last week. To answer how I became politicized or radicalized, I grew up in a family that was highly active from probably since I was about 2 years old. My father was the president of the Durham NAACP, and I went through stages with my love for the movement. With it being in my own household, I can't say that I was always enthusiastic about participating, and there was even a time where I began to rebel, and I literally was just making my plans to get as far away from Durham and civil rights as I possibly could. And upon graduating, I had this idea that perhaps I could not necessarily fight the system, but make a better life for people in some sort of community service-y type of missionary spirit, that somehow I didn't have to fight the system to actually make something different and better for people. And so that's when I taught third grade. And I was confronted with the reality that there is no such thing as charity when you're fighting oppression. And you can do all of the work you want to for the fish, but if the water that you throw them back into is still poisonous, then you may as well have done nothing at all. So what I was confronted with is someone somewhere, why not me, has to be actively engaging in tearing down oppressive structures and restructuring the system that we have so that it works for everyone. And so that experience really helped to push me into the direction of doing work to actively fight against oppression in any way that I can.
I'm Casey, and I would like to take a moment to thank my husband for coming to support me today. Thank you. Introvert, don't clap. I got radicalized. I would say that I got it from my mama. I grew up in a household that was very firmly black middle class. My dad is a diplomat and my mother is a jazz singer. And she wouldn't just do standards, she would take any kind of older pop song, blues, show tunes, and turn them into jazz and arrange them in that way. And one of the songs that spoke to me, all the songs that spoke to me most as a kid were songs that had to do with social justice. Living Just Enough for the City by Stevie Wonder, I would say, was something that got me very interested and shaped my point of view. Also a song called Work Song, which focused on the chain gang and that people had to suffer so much for doing something so small. Also growing up overseas, I got a chance to experience both being someone who people thought needed to be protected, and systems went out of their way to protect, and coming to the States and being someone who people needed to be protected against, and whose systems felt the need to oppress. And so seeing the realities of people who were suffering for the same things that I was being able to get a great living from really radicalized me, and also I would say caused some tension in my family as well. But apart from just radicalizing me, because I would say I was kind of a hippie kid. I grew up, when I came back to the States, fell in love with Ani DeFranco and all of that. And I would say that beyond becoming radical is my ability to converse with people who are not in radical spaces. Because frankly, that's most of the world. And we need to be able to figure out how to talk with people and build with people who may not be where we are, and to whom the types of jargon or events and things like that that speak to a lot of people in movement works don't work for. So that's something that's happened to me recently. It's been really awesome.
Hey, yeah, I also wanted to thank everyone for being here today and also for inviting me and welcoming me into this space. Again, my name's Kaori, I'm Japanese American, and I would say, I think a lot of people can share in this too, but I don't know if we all really have a choice in becoming politicized or radicalized. And I think that happens when you start realizing parts of your identity that you had no control over, but that control your life. And so for me, it was mentioned in my bio, but like I kind of conceptualize a lot of my day-to-day and how I enter this work with the hyphen in my identity of like Japanese American. And for me, I think my, I guess like penchant or like ability to first understand being politicized was that I have like this bicultural, bilingual background where when you kind of when you're able to live like in two spheres of your mind, you're also able to see the bullshit that's in the other one. And so, so yeah, you come home and like you go to your family space and you're with them in your own language, and then you go back to the real world and and like through that, you're able to see like the way people are acting that feel kind of wrong to you, they actually are wrong, and like things don't have to be that way. Is what you're able to gain through this like bicultural, bilingual lens. Is when you see something and it feels weird, and you go back to a different space, and you realize it doesn't have to be that way. And so I think that's where I was able to first gain like political foundations, and I'm really, really grateful for that. And then as far as becoming radicalized, I think that's a process that's forever, so I am still in it. But I also got it from my mama. I'd love to give a lot of credit to her. And I think it comes in the fact that, like, at the surface, like, she would not be a fighter or an advocate or anyone, or even identify with, like, feminism at the base 101 level. But she still, to me, represents resistance and autonomy in systems that work against her. So Japanese women are the gender equality index in Japan is like really fucking terrible for like a developed country. And she, like all other Japanese mothers, were expected to leave her career or not have a career for like my sake, her child. But in every day she emits this like power or energy that I survive on and need to live to do this work. So I attribute my radicalism to her. And also, like, the tremendous amount of love that she exhibits for me, so, and, like, from my whole family, too, but, like, I don't think I would have been able to reach this far in my politics if they weren't, like, yeah, do your thing. So, yeah, that's my story.
Hey, y'all, what's up? Olden. Yeah, so, for me, I think it was, like, okay, so growing up as a kid, my dad, background information, my dad grew up in a single mother household in Brooklyn, moved down to, in like a very like racially diverse community, and moved down to North Carolina when he was about middle school, and then moved strictly to a blacks only neighborhood. That really kind of like, that confused him a lot, so a lot of his parenting style was kind of built on this idea of me like experiencing diversity and like having like friends who didn't look like me and like all these different things like that. And my mother grew up in eastern North Carolina in Wilson, like pretty strictly like all black country area. And so her thinking was, oh, well, like upward mobility looks like me going to college and then making sure that my kids don't have to live in like really lower economic standing. So both my parents had this type of ideal. So I grew up in a small town in like North Carolina, outside of Winston-Salem, like Mayberry, Andy Griffith, like that's type of town I grew up in. Mostly white people, like population of 1,000, and went to predominantly white schools, like having this predominantly like white education and kind of like framing my mind, except for in the church that my father was a pastor of. And then during the summer, my parents were like, "You need culture. We're going to send you to a black camp." And so I went to summer camp, they put me in summer camp in like the inner city of like Winston-Salem, and I'm just like, "What the fuck is going on?" Major culture shocks like coming at me. It's like a kid, but like I hated this camp. It was like so horrible. I had to wake up early, and then like I had to like do exercises outside, and it made me like clean up like the trash on the ground. I had to walk to lunch. You know, it was like all these like really like horrible things. But then looking back on it, it was so political though. It was like a little like Black Panther like power camp because they would make us like stand in these long like rows, and we had to do a chant, and we say like, I will honor like my God, my family, my community. Respect yourself, and we had to do that. And like it's like these like series of like different things that we honor about ourselves and about our communities. And in the end, we say Harambe, which is Swahili for to pull together. And so it's like I'm 5 and 6 years old, hating having to do these chants in like the sweltering heat in the summer, but actually I'm being like politicized in these like really radical ways and really shape the way that I kind of live my life and see work happening for me today, which I didn't even like recognize. I'm sure my parents, if they wouldn't have known about that, they probably took me out of the camp. But, right? So that was really kind of the beginning of like me starting to think about things differently, and also with you as well as like just having these identities, right? Just like living day to day, having the identity of being Black, being queer, being trans, what that means for me to be in the South, to like possess all those identities, what it means to be the intersection of being Black and also having indigenous ancestry that's been erased and taken away from me because of white supremacy, right? And how do I like struggle with that? And all those things definitely worked to shape my political framing and my like continual radicalization.
Thank y'all. Casey, would you mind starting for us this time with the question of what liberation effort or struggle are you currently involved in?
I am involved with the Renaissance Community Cooperative, and we are building a grocery store in Northeast Greensboro, which has been dubbed a food desert. It does not have a lot of access to fresh foods at affordable prices. And people are seeing the impacts of disproportionate access there. People are dying earlier there. Years of expected life are shorter in that area. People are experiencing poverty from the lack of economic development that accompanies that. Not having a grocery store in the center where it used to be there meant that all of the other stores that were anchored by this shop up and left. So all of those jobs, all that economic activity, and also all that cultural vibrancy that comes from just having a center where people gather in your community kind of left. And so what we're doing is building a grocery store that will be cooperatively owned. How many of you know what a cooperative is? The business? Oh, so many people. Awesome. Wonderful. Well, this is going to be owned by the consumers. It's a business that everyone owns together. And I'm really excited about it. Right now, we have raised $1.45 million and are trying to raise more because, you know, they said the banks are too big to fail. This is too important to fail. And so if you're reading the papers and you hear the commentary about, well, why don't they just start now? They have like $1 million and change and they can get the rest as they go. No, we're not going to fall into that because we need this to be successful. And we need the funds that we have. We owe it to the community that has put so much into this in order to work. And I see this, it's interesting, when you talk about the Renaissance Community Cooperative, you talk about it in different ways. To different audiences, depending on what people are interested in, where they're engaging with you. And I find that when we go to places on the West Side, the narrative is always very much, yes, let's save these poor fat Black children. Oh my goodness, they're hideous. But like, no, seriously, we need to get them moving and some like fresh foods and like save the children. But when you go to RCC meetings with a lot of the members who live in the community, people are very much interested in, well, let's have something that's ours. Let's have a business that's ours that puts back into our community. People are interested in health, but the idea of health is a lot more broad and holistic and encompasses the vision of a healthy community that has economic vibrance and that works for everyone. And getting at that root cause is, okay, so why don't the kids have fresh fruits and vegetables? And being able to have an economy that not only works for them, but that they own a piece of. And so that is the RCC in a nutshell.
I'll go. Okay. So I just joined very recently the board of directors for Sister Song, and I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's a reproductive justice organization, one of the first and foundational ones. And I also don't know if you're familiar with reproductive justice framework, so I'll explain that a little bit. It's a framework that came up around the early 90s out of this frustration from women of color that the reproductive rights framework and the reproductive health framework weren't enough. And that you can pass laws that legalize abortion or that legalize birth control, or you can have all this legislation, but it can be legal and still totally inaccessible for populations based on your community, your education, your income. So out of that frustration came the reproductive justice framework, which encompasses the idea that our ultimate goal, what we all deserve and need to achieve, is the full and happy autonomy to make the family that you want. And that also means if you don't want a fucking family too. So that's the framework that kind of centers where my politics are, and that's the main scope of work that I'm doing. But I mean, that scope of work kind of covers everything, right? It's this intersectional framework that's very, very intentional. And so kind of expanding on that framework. So it came up in the 90s. Sister Song kind of holds that legacy with Loretta Ross, who was kind of the personality who kind of represented the movement. And now that movement's very much gaining a lot more recognition with Planned Parenthood, the corporation behind abortion, right, is just recently started using the term reproductive justice as well. So it's kind of getting a lot of ground, but that also often comes along with appropriation by Planned Parenthood. So so it's kind of we're at this transitional phase where we were just fighting to be recognized, and now we're being recognized, but also fighting to hold a legacy. And so that's where Sister Song is at now.
So I'm part of the labor rights movement, specifically the Fight for 15. North Carolina Raise Up for 15 is an initiative that started about 2 years ago with fast food workers. And so the idea and the philosophy behind the Fight for 15 and why there is an initiative to bring attention to low wages, it seems very surface level at the beginning. It's just kind of this socialist versus conservative idea of, you should have money for the work you're doing, you shouldn't have the money for the work you're doing, who deserves to have money, what's skilled labor, what's really valuable here, who's really contributing to GDP, who's producing things, who's contributing to the economy, who's creating jobs. And so you start just hearing all these blanketed statements and all this rhetoric that starts getting thrown around about the economy and about inflation. But the context is really missed when you just start to actually dig deep and think about the historical framework that has to be examined when you're looking at wage disparities in America. Now, particularly with people of color. You have an entire demographic of people that until about maybe 10 years ago had this plight where they basically could not do anything, whether it was related to education, whether it was related to economics, whether it was related to their judicial status. You had the war on drugs, and I guess I'm ending it about the war on drugs. That's why I said about 10 years ago, because I guess that was the last major era. And then, you have your post-racial America that we're supposedly in now. So I'm giving people that, at least. I guess, so maybe that would be even 15 years. But the reality is, African-American people have been disenfranchised in just about every single way that you could imagine. Even now, this is straight from Michelle Alexander's New Jim Crow. It is more likely that an African-American man who has a clean record will be denied job opportunities over a Caucasian man who has a felony. That's in 2000, this was in 2010. So the idea that, okay, so you have this statistic, and then you have people that were rejected from participating in democracy. They could not even elect leaders. So now you hear this whole thing about, well, maybe if you would just vote. Well, these people were deliberately kept out of democracy for years. Then you have the integration of schools where black teachers were fired, and then you had white teachers that came in that had no interest in getting to know these students and caring about their stories, and a lot of them are still teaching, and people who had no idea about cultural respect and being culturally responsive, so there was no curriculum drafted. And so then these kids are graduating, and you're saying that they don't have the skills to participate in the economy. So then somebody may go to jail, and then they get arrested, and then they get this rap sheet, and so then they come back out and they try to get a job, and they can't participate in the economy. Or then you have somebody who just couldn't afford to go to college. And then you're saying they don't have the skills to participate in the economy. And there are just all these excuses that are made. But at the end of the day, sheer racism has kept people away from getting these so-called skills that you need to participate in the economy. And now people that are making billions of dollars for these corporations like McDonald's are only seeing $1 out of every 1,000 that their CEO makes. When their CEO was more than likely an heir of privilege, an heir of education, an heir of money, an heir of racial privilege, an heir of masculine privilege. So to me, the wage disparity, it's really about an ethical disparity. It's really about a truth disparity. Who's willing to acknowledge what really caused the racial and economic gap and disenfranchising that we see, and what are we going to do to try to address it? And the Fight for 15 is only one of those fights. But it would just take people admitting that they did a lot of fucked up things in the past. And so until that, we're probably going to keep just telling people that we can't survive off of 725 and hoping that they listen.
You just said all the things.
Oh,
I just want to sit on that for a second. I work locally here at the Black Lives Matter Greensboro movement, and work as part of the larger work that's happening nationally and globally around Black liberation. And also, so that's a big part of the work that I do. Queer liberation theology is a really big part of my framing, and also something that carries into the work that I do with the organization American Friends Service Committee. I work there as an intern doing peace and economic justice work. And so I get the privilege to take their resources and actually use them for things that I care about and not what they care about. Because really they do, like, I mean, as a nonprofit organization, right, it's still functioning under this system of capitalism that is still disenfranchising a lot of people. And so they tell me things like, they're like, yeah, we want to move away from like a youth services point of view to like youth advocacy. You want to be like Ella Baker for like millennials. I'm like, but you're not going to do that when you have structural racism, though. Like, you're not going to do that when everybody who works in positions and staff positions are mostly white, and everybody who are interns and volunteers are like mostly people of color. Like, that's what you're not going to do, because then you're co-opting people's narratives in order to get funding. And so a lot of my work that I do there within peace and economic justice looks like, okay, so how can I take what you want me to do and actually just connect with people in the community that I know who are doing that work, and you're trying to co-opt their narrative and their work that they're doing, and how can I just use your resources to make that happen? And sometimes it's successful, sometimes it's not. Like, you know, like sometimes there are things they want us to concede around language, because Quakers believe in nonviolence, but structural racism is violent, you know? So I'm like, but how can you tell me you believe in this, but yet when I say I'm fighting for my liberation, you have pushback because it's a violent word? Like, that's what's not gonna happen here, you know? So a lot of things that I do is just really trying to pull like all the radicalness from doing the awesome work that I love to do with like my friends and comrades in the community, and then taking that with AFSC, using their resources, and then trying to like funnel that or channel that with that like throughout every avenue that I can. It's like, okay, so you say you want to do these things, but y'all don't say nothing about queer people. Like, come on, y'all, that's fucked up. Like let's broaden this narrative, and here are a bunch of books that you can read, but I'm not going to educate you. So, you know, like really trying to push that envelope, which is one of those things where it's kind of like within the nonprofit complex, is like, whatever, I'm not trying to say that, you know, but I am trying to, while I am there and while they are like using me until they get tired of my radical ass and they like fire me or something. I'm gonna take that money and take those resources and actually try to pull it, actually try to push it towards something that's already being built, that's been building and happening before AFSC, is gonna happen after AFSC, you know, and really press that upon them that it's not about you maintaining your job, but about us dismantling the system and how can we actually move our goals towards that.
Sweet. Kiori, would you like to kick us off with the question of what connections and intersections between these different initiatives that are represented do you see? And or what do you see as the larger struggle or revolution that you're participating in?
Okay. Yeah. It's a big fucking question. And I also forgot to mention something huge that I do. So I'm going to finish my last question off and then start the second one. But I'm part of this radical Angry Asian Asian American Alliance at UNC, and this is a new organization, but also a new part of me, which is recognizing and reconciling that I am Asian American and not just Japanese American, and that my race is what's recognized here, not really just my nationality, and that I will always be Asian, and no matter how much whiteness I've participated in, having been born and raised in Chapel Hill, and and that I can't and what that really means, because I really Asian Americans are invisible in the South, and I was invisible to myself, and I was really, and it's just very recent that I'm reconciling that. So that's a lot of what I do now. And so this next question then of what do you see is the larger struggle for the movement? So again, the reproductive justice framework, it really helps me conceptualize what the intersectionality is in our liberation, our autonomy, and I think that the framework helps me think about it in that. So what we're striving for is the autonomy, the bodily autonomy for every single individual to be able to make decisions about their family, about their own self. And in that way, I'm able to see all the connections between what was called the war on women, but then also state-issued violence on bodies of Black and brown bodies. When shit like that's going down, you can't even think for a second what it looks like if you want to have a family. Right. Or you can't even think for a second what you want to do with your own body because you don't know what's going to happen to it because you don't have autonomy. So for me, that's the intersection of what all these movements are, is this framework of that all we want is to be able to make a decision, and that's what we're fighting for. And so another I think we're going to get to this maybe, but what helps me also work through this, because there's a lot of question right now about what allyship can look like, and how fucked up it is all the time though, but this idea of how can we be together when we are really different, and when what we really need to be doing is paying attention to our differences, is I think recognizing that all of us in this room are here because of some amount of trauma, and you don't enter justice framework because you thought everything was right to begin with. And so I think that's what, I think we're going to talk about this in a second too, but this is kind of what I think is a struggle, is when we're trying to build solidarity across people who are kind of getting pigeonholed or being firmly understood as different. We need to hold those differences, but also kind of maybe create some understanding or recognition that there is some trauma to different degrees, and we need to stay in our lane, but that you don't enter a justice framework and people don't come into this movement because everything was perfect for them to begin with. Yeah.
I see connections, I guess, between bodies. That's what I would say. Whether people are being, and minds, whether people are being incarcerated and prevented from earning a living, whether it's that people don't get to decide what their families are going to look like, or even what they're going to do with their own bodies. I see a connection between that and the work that the RCC is doing, because Black lives matter, and our lives are lived through our bodies. We only have one. I mean, I don't know what people believe and whatnot. People have different religious experiences. I'm a Quaker. I always say I identify with Natty Green because I'm a shitty Quaker too. It's a long story, but at Guilford I would always have to tell people that I actually grew up Quaker and converted to black at 13. It was a personal decision. But no, I really feel like all of these are very connected around the fact that this is our life, this is what you get. And we're telling people through our actions and the way we choose to set up society and the way it's set up for us, that what you get gets to be horrible and that's okay. That's okay with me. You don't get to get enough to eat. You don't get to get enough of things that will keep you here as long as my food will keep me here. And I'm okay with you living a little less. And that, to me, is not okay. And so that's where I see these intersections. And specifically along like racial lines, Black Lives Matter, and they're being treated like they don't. Because when we look at health disparities, it's lives of generally people of color who are impacted, and also along class lines, in terms of being able to live longer and live without as much pain or suffering, just even physical pain or mental stress that these systems and structures provide for us to deal with. Which manifests itself often in us just not living as longer. We're living long, but miserable lives. And that's not what I'm okay with having happen. So that's why those are some connections that I see.
Yeah, I think it's definitely it's like a big old like Venn diagram. There's like a bazillion circles and also those are like connected and like have some commonalities, but all the other different stuff. No, yeah, I mean, so there are a lot of like things with like intersections. And I think one of the biggest things that you mentioned is really important is like healing, right? So what does healing look like for people who come into spaces wanting to do justice work, like you said, like right on. And we all come in with different trauma, and we're all somewhere on this oppressor-oppressed continuum, and so we're trying to get free and heal ourselves while then also inflicting pain on another person as well, you know, either intentionally or unintentionally. And we talk a lot about tearing down systems and things like that. And it's like I want to talk about what it means to reimagine everything. And it's like reimagining, Grace Lee Boggs talks about like reimagining labor, reimagining how your labor and how your passion and the work you do in your community could be connected to your labor. But it's not like a drudgeful, painful labor. It's like it's something that you enjoy because you're actually contributing back to your communities. And it's like a reciprocal thing happening. What does it mean for me to reimagine my identities like outside the context of white supremacy? Oh my God, I don't know. There's like bulls I'm not even thinking about that because for so long it's always been like in opposition to, in connection with like whiteness, heterosexuality, straightness, cisness, you know, like my positionality as a U.S. citizen in regards to like a person who is not, you know, like all these different things. What it means for me to be black in opposition to another person of color who might be Latino, who might be Asian American, you know, all these different things always in like opposition to, but never something that kind of like moves and flows together, and never really understood as all of it being a part of this like really big conglomerate. Like you pull one thread, it all comes apart. So that's why like this like partial freedom like shit doesn't work. Like we all gotta get free together. So and part of getting free together looks like what that healing looks like, and thinking about what a healing space can look like outside of these systems that hold us up.
Wow. I would say when I hear about reproductive justice, when I hear about food justice, when I hear about all the different types of justice Holden is for, really the commonality I see, there's so many, but one that sticks out to me is power. And a lot of people run away from that word. You hear power, you just start to think corruption and oppression. But it's good when you realize that you have a certain amount of power. or that you should have a certain amount of power. Because when someone has total power over you, whether it's telling you how you should treat your body as a woman, whether it's telling you when and where and how you can get food, whether it's telling you when, where, and how you can marry someone, whether it's telling you how much you should make, even though you have a family that you should feed, whether it's telling you your kid's going to go to a crappy school and there's really nothing you can do about it. And I'm not, well, okay, never mind, that's another. But this idea that people should have a choice to live a certain quality of life and be able to participate in the decisions that are going to happen to them is a very common theme, and that's what democracy supposedly is. It's supposed to be invoking your participation in decisions that are going to happen to you, and that's not what we're seeing. And we're not seeing it for anybody who doesn't fit in this mold of white patriarchal privilege and wealth. If you do not fit that mold in America, in some way decisions are continuously being made for you. And that sucks. It sucks when you're in a classroom and you have a teacher that's just all of a sudden just changing stuff, like tomorrow, like you have to do something and you had no say in it. It sucks when you are working on a job and they're like, now we're going to move staff meetings to Wednesday instead of moving them on Monday, and that's what we're just going to do, and there's nothing you can do about it. But I have soccer practice. I don't care. There's nothing you can do about it. And you're not engaged in that process at all, but you still have to be impacted by the decision. That really sucks for people in general. And in a participative democracy, in really any sort of community that works, you will never have a system where people are just the recipients of decisions, where people are just impacted by decisions, and bad decisions at that, oppressive decisions at that. So it's ironic that now it's so rebellious and hardcore to just want someone to make you and invite you to be part of the process. That's all we're asking. Don't make something happen to me. Let me be part of the process. Whatever law you have that's sending 1 in every 3 black men to jail, let me figure out what that is so I can be part of that process and help you change it. Whatever it is you have that's telling people who love each other that they can't get married, I don't know where that decision was made because I don't agree with that, so let me be part of that decision making because it's happening to me. It's happening to my friends. So that's what this fight is about, being able to realize that you have power and that someone else who has power should not be using that power to make your life miserable. So just take your power back. That was really anticlimactic for being there.
Holden, would you like to start us off on our last prepared question, which is,
Sure.
What do you want the revolution we raise the next generation to look like? Or it's sorry, I'm not sorry, actually. Or, so like, what lessons do you want to uplift? Because people have been doing movement work for a very, very long time. What lessons have we learned that we want to bring forward? But are there also things that you would like to see changed or deepened or claimed or done differently as we move forward?
Ooh, so I want the microphone of cis straight men to be shut off. Like there needs to be like a ceasefire for like like 10 years where they just don't say nothing. I'm over it, yo. Like seriously. No, I'm so committed to like radical and transformative masculinity, because that like misogyny and sexism, that is yikes. That's a really painful thing. And it really pains me to see how much it's like the amount of erasure that has happened because of patriarchy, right? The amount of erasure of folks who have been like down in the movement, where Diane Nash, right? And Selma straight up depicted her as just like some side babe making sandwiches, right? Like, what is that? No, and that really pisses me off, and I see it happening now with Black Lives Matter, and it really pisses me off. And so, especially growing up, assigned female at birth, experiencing having that face-to-face interaction with sexism, with misogyny, and now identifying as a transmasculine person who walks through the world looking like this. I see how people treat me differently, they speak to me differently, they respect what I have to say more, and it's bullshit, right? And it's literally bullshit. And so for me and my positionality as a transmasculine person, I feel like I have personally, not everybody, because ain't nobody job to teach nobody shit, but me personally, I feel like I have a positionality where I can really be like, yo, seriously, I'm about radicalizing this shit because I can define what masculinity looks like for me, right? Because I have all these tropes put on me as a black person who looks like a man that, oh, you're automatically going to do these things, my body is engaged with in different ways, and I want to take the power of me claiming my identity back, right? I want to take masculinity and make it something that's actually radical, that can actually actually the work of undoing misogyny, for masculine people in of themselves, not femme women having to educate, or women having to educate men about why sexism is bad, why misogyny is bad. I'm not here for that. That's one thing I want to see happen in the movement. Another thing I want to see happen in the movement. Pow. Another thing I want to see happen in the movement. I would love to do the work of really looking at Christianity, the fucking horrible domination that it has. I have the privilege of being brought up in a Christian household, a Christian culture, right? And that's definitely a privilege within the context of westernized countries, that religious privilege, and really seeing, just from first-hand experience growing up, really seeing the power that the church has to really do some radical shit. But until that work, until what we're talking about here actually happens in churches, it's not gonna happen, right? It's not gonna happen. And for me, my passion looks like taking spirituality and Christianity and taking all the really ratchet that's happening out here and be like, yo, this message is about liberation, for all people, including people in the church who do perpetuate horrible atrocities all the time, right? And they think it's out of a place of growth and becoming more spiritual and getting closer to God, but they're actually severing themselves from community, right? So really putting forth the transformative message for that. I would love to see that pop off in the movement. I would love to be a part of kind of bridging that gap that happens a lot. That I feel is really necessary, and it's really played an important role. And I think spirituality in general is something that's really important for our communal healing, and I would see spirituality incorporated more into media spaces, whatever that spirituality whatever it may be, but some type of spirituality around healing and community building. Yeah.
This is a super hard question. But I think one thing I think about a lot so I'm also glad you mentioned the work that's been done already. I think one thing that future judge, I think all these questions are things I don't know, I think I joke a lot with my friends about how I need 10 years to explain myself, really, is this is, all these questions are one of those questions. But, I think, so really centering the legacy of the people who've done so much work till now is important for the next generations too. And then another thing I think about a lot is when we're entering movement work and we think about movements, people are always what is reproductive justice to you, or what's the end game? And you're asking me these questions, but I don't know, I've never seen it. None of us have ever seen what reproductive justice really looks like. None of us have seen what liberation really looks like for any of us here. So when you're asking these questions, you're asking questions, but don't expect answers, you know? When you're a young person and you're starting to enter these movements, there's so much frustration and confusion and darkness about where we're really trying to get to, but there is no answer. None of us know it. None of us have ever had it for ourselves. So I think I wish I had this conversation earlier in my life. So I think this when I first read that question or heard that question, I was I don't know what I'd want to tell my younger self, and that's what the first thing that came to mind is you're not fighting for something that you can put into words or you can paint a picture, because you have never seen it, and none of us ever have.
I want a movement for the next generation that celebrates Black mediocrity. I really do. I am so over the respectability politics narrative that you have to be brilliant in school or an entrepreneur. Let's focus on entrepreneurs. Or like you have to be like, okay, go achieve your dreams and get paid for it and get paid lots of money to do what you love. Do you know how few people get that? And like you have to, if you're in school and you've been like suspended unfairly, or you're in the school to prison pipeline. Okay, well, did you curse? Well, I mean, like, there should be more space for people, particularly people of color, to be human, and for them to be celebrated just for existing. I say them because I'm excellent. But, mediocre people. No, but seriously, all jokes aside, I love that I see this happening. I love that when people are in the streets over people who have been murdered, and the media pushback is, but wasn't he looking at the cop cross-eyed? Didn't he like smoke a joint at some point in his life? Young Black people are saying, so what? He deserved to live. She deserved to live. She deserves excellence. Well, we have these schools and they're failing, but I mean, if you look at the kids, how are they behaved? They deserve excellent schools as well. And so I really want to get away from this narrative that you have to be a super person to be like respected or to have what you need and be a person of color at the same time. For that reason, I love Scandal. I love it. I love Shonda Rhimes showing Olivia Pope in all of her ridiculousness and poor decision making. I love her showing her having that at the same side as her being brilliant, close to power and critiquing it, and that there are so many more ways on TV that you can see Black existence. It's not perfect, or even particularly liberatory, but I love that it's there and that you have more options. And so that is something that I really want to see for the next generation. I also really want to see a focus on tangible things that we can have. Was it Bill O'Reilly, like last election cycle, a couple election cycles, they want things. Yes, I want things. I want a decent salary. I want everyone I know and don't know to be able to get a decent salary and get paid for the work they do, no matter how important or unimportant it is. And for the next generation of organizers to hold that as something central, as something that it's not just about, ooh, I was about to step in it, let me mess with that. Instead of just focusing on things up here in the intellectual sphere, focusing on ways that we can bring the resources we need to the communities that we come from. And also, like, maybe making space for, like, dreams to look different and recognizing that, like, everybody doesn't get to do their favorite thing and get paid for it. And that's okay. And figuring out how to make all types of labor valuable and valued. And not giving kids this complex that you're gonna grow up and what are you gonna be and this is who you are. But for that next generation to be able to just live their lives.
I would say that I hope this next generation focuses on a different I word than the generations of the past. So instead of integration, I would like to see a focus on inclusion, because I think there's a difference. In integration, you are melding yourself with something else. In inclusion, you are who you are, and you are being involved, and you're still part of the process, and you never have to lose who you are. And you're choosing. I mean, integration just sounds forced. Like, I want you to integrate with each other. Like, I don't want to do that. That just sounds like, why do I? But versus, you should be included in a process. That just sounds so much more inviting. Like, I'm included. And the reason that that's important also is because there's so many ways that we subconsciously exclude people, and we don't even know it. It's so funny. And another thing I would like to see, I guess it kind of goes with this, is self-love versus self-righteousness. Because self-righteousness, you start to exclude so many people. And it's ironic because you even see it in the movement a lot. Oh, this person, they didn't get this kind of degree in AFAM, so I mean, I don't really want to hear it because I know more about feminism and black academia and all of these things because I studied these and I did these models and I studied abroad. And so then ironically, they begin to become a movement elitist, and you have those things, and then you have people that exclude people just simply because they don't believe what you believe, which is ironic because we're trying to be included, and then we start to exclude people who want to even be included with our movement, but because they don't necessarily see everything like we see it, we say, no, you can't be a part of my movement. I mean, and then you have the black radical kids that went to Duke versus the black radical kids in the hood versus the black, and I mean, it's just so ironic how there's so many different ways that we can exclude each other and not even realize it. And there's so much power in building those coalitions. There's so much power in including, there's so much power in engaging so many different mindsets and so many different frameworks, and that can really be lost if people are just focused on thinking in one way and in one track and excluding people, because when you exclude people, you're excluding opportunities for yourself. So that's what I'd like to see, inclusion as opposed to integration.
Thank you. So, unfortunately, we are at time, and so we don't get to do a question and answer, which is disappointing because these are just 4 of the amazing people that are at this conference this weekend, and there's so much knowledge and experience and wisdom here in this room. So I encourage you all to take an opportunity and get to know somebody that you don't know over the course of today, and maybe they'll impart some wisdom on you beyond just this panel. But I would like to thank all of our panelists for being up here and speaking publicly, which I know can require courage of some of us. So if we could all just give them a round of applause. And thank you all so much for being here. I think that we have about 10 minutes of transition time before the third panels or the third workshop sessions get started. Peace.
Oh, wait a second.